Jim, good morning. It's so great to be reconnected with you. How are things in Alaska this morning?
Good morning, Gary. We're at about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. We've gotten a couple of feet of snow over the last 10 days, so we're still very, very much in winter time up here.
Well, I know breakup's coming soon, so fingers crossed for that. Thanks so much. I know you've got board meetings coming up. You're right on the cusp of that. This is an inordinately busy and important time. I wanted really so much to hear from you, albeit in this very short thumbnail. For the years that I've known you, I've witnessed your leadership under siege. Not unlike some other leaders, but not only have you been riding this transformative wave of dramatic change in higher education, but you, like many state universities, but not nearly to the same extent as Alaska, have seen some draconian budget cuts that have created deep crises. You're having the state's economy with the resource extraction and tourism now really considerably diminished. And so there is a high level of turmoil that you've been negotiating, and now coronavirus and all of the reimagination from that. My head spins thinking about it, and so I wanted to ask, in the context in which you find yourself right now, what are you doing to build community for what may be a new reality that is emerging for you and colleagues in Alaska?
Well, thanks, Gary. You're right. It's a very stressful period. Our base case is one of severe budget reductions here in Alaska, and of course, all the other trends you refer to across the country in higher education and the transformations that are happening. Declining enrollments, increasing student debt, et cetera, all of those factors. So that's our base case, which is pretty challenging. And then you add on this overlay, very challenging overlay of COVID. So it's definitely impacting us in terms of cost and how we respond. We have 16 campuses in our state. Spread out over 1,300 miles from the southernmost campus to the northernmost campus. For those folks who know some of these distances, that's the distance between Seattle and San Diego. And so we have, campuses within that area. So it is no question a strained time, but how do we deal with it? How do we build community? And I think it's as simple and as complicated as communicate, and then communicate a whole lot more. So we have leadership team meetings every single day, and we're dealing with responses and dealing with the policy issues that come up. Are we going to open after spring break? What do we do about grades? What do we do about refunding fees? Online transition, all of that is critical, of course, now that we've had to deal with it. But we're communicating in writing, we're communicating via Zoom, we're communicating in multiple phone calls. So, I've been working at home now for almost a month, and I'm wearing this chair out and my Zoom account out, but it's 12, 13 hours a day of Zoom calls, basically. So communication, I think, is key here, and it's not just the frequency of the communication. I think it's important to the tone of the communication. It's got to be calm. It's got to be steady. It's got to be consistent. And I think it also has to be timely. People are worried. They're at home, locked up essentially, and so they have plenty of time to make stuff up. Humans are really, really good at making things up. So we want to make sure that we're communicating timely, respectfully, calmly, and in an informed way as much as possible. And then another thing is, compassion or grace. I think is critically important here too. I notice sometimes when we're not in a situation like this, our communications might be a little more bureaucratic and a little bit more tense and a little bit more, okay, where's the spreadsheet? Where's the PowerPoint presentation to give to the board? And I think, we're a little more grace here, understanding that we're all human and that we have lives outside of the important work we do in education for our university. And so I think that's an important way in which we can build community.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, and it resonates with me personally, and it really might tee up where I wanted to go next, which is as you look around, and I don't mean just within the work context, but maybe the community context, maybe even more broadly than that. When you look around right now, Jim, what do you see that's giving you hope?
Well, it's a great question because looking around, there's a lot of reason not to have hope, right? You teed up the tough situation we're experiencing in Alaska. And of course, everybody across the world is experiencing these things, but commodity prices are way, way down. That's how our economy runs. Tourism is going to be virtually nil this year, another huge economic factor. Fishing and fish processing is going to be really hit hard. And then over the last several decades, we've really tried to diversify our economy through saving oil money and then investing that oil money in markets. And that's taken a hit as well. So our state government, its biggest single revenue source last year was earnings from investments, not oil, not fish taxes or mining taxes. So, so we're in a quadruple whammy up here. What gives me hope in the face of all that is that Alaskans have been living in this rough place for 15,000 years. And so what are the values that have carried people forward and through tough times for that long? And it's grit, and it's hard work, and it's care for elders, and it's a sense of humor, it's a sense of community. All those things I think are coming out strong. A couple of days ago, a neighbor brought us masks because the governor said everybody's going to wear masks now when they go outside. So people are taking care of each other. My wife was dropping off cookies to elders yesterday here in the community. So that gives me, I think, a lot of hope. Here at the university, we've donated facilities to the healthcare folks in our state. So we will have healthcare workers and patients on our campuses and in our facilities. We handed over all of our personal protective equipment from our nursing school and our other training programs. It's all handed over to the healthcare folks. All our economists are modeling the economy of the future. Our epidemiologists are working closely with the state government, the governor, and his team to try to model how this pandemic is going to make its way through our community. So I think folks are really stepping up. I mean, our faculty who are, they're all online now, every single one of them. And we had a lot of early technological adopters, who've been online for quite a while, but every single one of them right now is, because all of our courses have been shifted. So tremendous amount of work, tremendous amount of commitment, tremendous amount of generosity has been demonstrated here. So that gives me a lot of hope. We've got a lot of smart people working hard to help us all through this crisis.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. There's a real generative narrative in all of that. Let me just close with maybe one final question. Maybe that we're still too close to it right now to be able to judge this, but you've always had an ability to step back and see a more distant perspective on things. Is there a question? Are there questions that are emerging for you now, Jim, maybe fostered by these current conditions that you think other adaptive leaders should be thinking about?
Well, yeah, there are certainly the daily response stuff, and I'm trying to move away from that as much as possible. Clearly, we have to make these decisions, but I'm trying to think about, my short-term perspective now is on the fall of 2020, and what are we going to do in the fall of 2020? But I'm trying to carve out as much space as I can to think out minimum 5 years, more out 20. Because a kid who's born today, if that kid stays on track in terms of his or her education through primary and secondary school, will be coming to us, I hope, and will be graduating about that time in 2040. So I'm thinking that we have to think about those possibilities now in order to make sure that the steps that are taken next fall, next year, next decade are going to be there, so that there's a relevant, high quality opportunity for higher education for that young person born today. What does it mean in terms of our bureaucracies? What does it mean in terms of how we allocate costs? What does it mean in terms of technology and how we invest in technology? What does it mean in terms of what a degree stands for? Right? And what does it represent? What does it mean in terms of how we enable people to access all of the tremendous wisdom and knowledge that our faculty have in terms of substance, but also in terms of how to learn through a lifetime? How are we going to contribute to the jobs of the future? Because people typically come to universities. I mean, many want to study the eternal verities, but most folks want to come to get the skills needed to make a career. Well, what are the careers going to be? And I think this pandemic really shook things up. What are the jobs that are going to be out there for people? Are they going to require higher education? Does higher education, is it a condition for the creation of those new jobs? And of course, we've talked about that for decades. And we've had some time to think about it for decades, but this pandemic, I think very much like 9/11, is going to change things forever. And so how do we get in front of those changes? I've got a corgi dog here rustling through my papers. But how do we get out in front of those changes so that we're not hit by the wave, but we're actually able to get down in that trough and ride this wave in a way that maximizes our relevance and our mission for the future?
Yeah, that's a powerful way to bring us to a close, with that idea of this moment potentially accelerating the conditions that will bring about some significant change. And so with that, Jim, I want to close with my great appreciation for several things. One, for the leadership that you've demonstrated for the years that I've known you. Secondly, just your equanimity through such difficult times. And thirdly, this is the first time that I've actually had an educator tell me to my face that the dog ate his homework. Thank you, Jim. Be well.
Thank you, Gary. And the same to you. I appreciate the opportunity to share. Thank you.
Thanks.